Hi, welcome to another exciting episode of the Andre the Beast Creighton Show. Another exciting show and definitely another exciting guest. Today is no different. But check this out. This is one episode that you really don't want to miss, because just imagine, if you will, writing a book or just information and turning that diary, aka memoir, I think I pronounced that right, into a healing journey. Let's go deeper. Not just a healing journey, but a legacy reincarnation. Taking the time out of who you are to look into the person that created you. And at this particular point, we're talking about mom and dad. But with this particular situation, we're talking about a mom. Understanding who she is, where she came from, her ups, her downs, her strengths. And more importantly, this is something that we as individuals, as humans, don't take in consideration. How that affects us. That's deep. How it affects us. Then not only that, I'm getting ready to spill the beans. Imagine, if you will, there's a crime scene. Drowning, a car accident. And you are not just a first responder, so to speak, but you're that community activist. That you're going there to handle a crisis situation. Something almost like CSI. And when you're a crisis, what's the word I want to use? To advocate for a crisis situation, that's a lot on your plate. Without further ado, let's welcome a young lady all the way from Orlando, Florida, who, if you haven't read the memoirs, I can't never pronounce that word right. If you hadn't read the literature, now's the time to start getting the literature in your home and reading it. Let's welcome to the show, Miss Lynn Green, all the way from Orlando, Florida. What's up, baby girl?
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for having me.
I looked at your questionnaire and I said, oh my God, how do we take so much information and consolidate it into 30 minutes and be very informative to let you tell your journey? I figured it out. Yeah, I'm going to start it like this. Tell me a little bit about Miss Green. Who is Miss Green?
Yes, so Miss Green is born in Puerto Rico, raised by a Dominican family. We migrated here as a family when I was about 4 years old. So I did not speak a lick of English. Learned English here thanks to Sesame Street for giving me a great start before I actually started kindergarten. I spent my mornings, watching Sesame Street. And I remember at that time, this was the early 80s, seeing people like me on Sesame Street who also were Latin and speaking Spanish and English. So that was my start to the United States of America. And it's interesting because I actually picked up English very quickly, love to read, love to write, so much so that when people see me, they have no idea that I am Hispanic and that I speak any Spanish. So that was a blessing. Fast forward, I, just ended up working in public service because I love people, and I love community. And here I am now, having built that love for service into so many different things, from an inspirational blog to sharing my healing journey to working with the community. And also helping people in nonprofits who are out there trying to do great things for people. So that's a little, in a nutshell, who Lynn Green is.
Let's go back. Puerto Rico, the Dominican. How did those two cross paths first? Let's start there first.
Yeah, so and in the book, I really took pleasure in outlining kind of like the history of that as well. And around that time, I was born in 1981. Prior to that, I would say some years before that, there was a movement of Dominicans who were going to Puerto Rico. Some of them, like we've seen a lot of Cubans come here to Florida on these makeshift boats, looking for freedom and opportunity. So my mother was one of those women who decided that she would go to Puerto Rico. She was an entrepreneur. She had several salons and she opened several salons there in Puerto Rico. Always upward movement was her focus, right? So we happened to have been born there, my sister and I. She married and met my father in Puerto Rico. And then ultimately some things happened, which I outline in the book, domestic violence related, which caused my mother to leave there. But ultimately, that's how the Dominican Puerto Rico migration thing happened. And a lot of people don't know that.
You know, I spent a lot of time in the Dominican, and I have some friends that are on the island in Puerto Rico. But you said to get freedom. And this is what I find kind of crazy. You're on an island with pretty much resources. It's almost like paradise. And don't get me wrong, I know there's places in the Dominican and Puerto Rico that you go, wow, but still, it's a life that even people in America thrive to go to all the time. So my question here is, I don't know what things were like in the 80s there, what type of economic struggles that they were dealing with, but from your book dealing with your mom, she was a successful entrepreneur there. What other opportunities was she looking at? Why would you leave what I would consider paradise just to come to America when you're not in captivity? You're on a beautiful island and you're self-sufficient because you're an entrepreneur.
Yes, and it's interesting, right? Because one of the things that I speak of in my book is that our migration story was different than from what most people think, right? Especially
Right.
when you think about immigrants, I think a lot of people think about Mexico, and how horrible the situation is there and how they have to flee there, as we've seen in many ways that they've done that to come here, to be able to get jobs and provide for their family. Our story was different in that my mother's focus was opportunity, and she saw greater opportunity for us in education, especially in education. That was her focus, wanting to make sure that we got a good education, great jobs, far better than she would imagine we would be able to in the Dominican Republic. At that time, and for those who know a little bit about the Dominican Republic, Haiti, because we're on the same island, a lot of these Caribbean countries, government really rules the way things are managed there. And during that time and prior to that, I go into the history of that a little in my book, because like you said at the top of this, it was about understanding this woman, where she came from, her
Right.
history, and why she became how she was, right? So, yeah, I there was a lot of distrust, not very much opportunity. As if you can imagine, kind of like what we're living right now, with the things that are shifting and changing in our culture and with our careers and things like that. Pretty much similar to what was happening back then on a greater scale, because government wasn't as focused on the people.
When your mom came here, did she have resources? Did she have a connection? We hear about, the Haitians and the Afrikaners and the Mexicans. They come here and some of them don't really have a network to operate in. Your mom leaving domestic violence to come here. Did she have any resources at all? Was there any family already currently implanted in the United States?
Yeah, so we moved to Providence, Rhode Island when we left the Dominican Republic. We had spent a little time from the time my mother left Puerto Rico to the time we ultimately came here, I'd say about a couple years. She reconnected with an old love and remarried, and he actually was here before we actually came. So, that was a good foundation for us because we had a home to come to, but everything else was fresh. So we go from living what I think was a privileged life in the Dominican Republic. My mother had a nanny that would take care of us. She had a lady who would cook in the home. She had her businesses. And here she comes to a brand new country, doesn't speak the language. We had to apply for food stamps and Medicaid, and that was back when the food stamps were in the paper book form, and we used to receive the block cheese. So as kids, of course, it was okay because kids are very resilient. We just adapt to our environment, and especially at that age,
Right.
3, 4, 5, it was just an adventure, is what it was. But certainly for her, it was it took some adjustment.
That's what I was getting ready to say. Like, how much of an adjustment? Because you don't go from being what you just said, privileged. I mean, you got a nanny, somebody in your house that's cooking every day, and now you're coming to reunite with an old lover. So this is a two-part question. I know you know more about it than me because your mom shared it with you. What was his lifestyle like? Was he successful? Was he an entrepreneur? What was him? What was his situation?
Here's an interesting thing about my father. He was a Secret Service to the Dominican president prior to coming here. The government, or at least the political, the state of politics in government in the Dominican Republic, as in many Hispanic countries, was very volatile. And it was so much so that imagine the Republican Party and the Democratic Party constantly being at odds, as we know they are. But let's upgrade that to the point where you're a part of these parties, and now people are actually looking to kill you.
I was getting ready to say something like that too. Yeah.
Yes. And so that was common back then because politics was such a major part of people's lives and what was driving their progress. So he actually ended up coming here, fleeing from that. He had a political community here already that would meet on a regular basis. But, as far as my mother coming here and having to adapt to the change, I think her humble upbringing, even though she was what I consider to be, and most in my family consider to be the matriarch of the family who helped rise and helped other people rise and also come here to the States for opportunity, she was ready to take it on. One thing that I think I have, even despite our conflict in maternal, daughter relationship, is that I got that from her, that tenacity, that discipline, that you got to sacrifice in order to get what you want, because that's how she made it to where she was in the Dominican Republic. So I think it was just, I've been there before, I can do it again type of mentality.
Let me retrack and make sure I'm getting a clear understanding of your father versus the guy that's already in the United States. The guy that's already in the United States, this isn't your biological father, correct?
It's not, but it's interesting that in speaking of him, you could tell no different, because he is actually the man that raised us, the one that stood, before us and was that pillar of a male role model for us. I never saw my father again after my mother left him. There was no attempt to, find us, to come see about us, or anything like that. So when I speak of my father, I speak of my stepfather, but I don't necessarily use that term. He is the only father I know.
So this is the guy that fled. It was who you're talking about. That's what I wanted to clarify.
Yes.
Not
yes.
the one that's still, we don't know.
Not the biological.
Okay, now it makes sense. So, your mom sounds like the new modern day Harriet Tubman. for your culture. So it wasn't always easy for you with some things that you and your mom went through, which led you to write the secrets of the memoirs about your relationship with your mom maternal. What were some of the things that kind of clash? And don't get me wrong, I don't want to put you on the spot to where this happens in any culture when you're dealing with mother and daughter. And I haven't seen it play any other way. They're either close or they're not close, or they bond later in life when they either separated from each other and all that estrogen is gone, is separate ways. What were some of the crises that you was dealing with?
Yeah, so I think it's interesting, right? That we are okay to speak of daddy issues, right? Daddy issues, you hear that all the time.
Yeah.
But no one, and out of respect, I understand, wants to express that they have this difficult relationship with their mother. Your mother is who brought you into this world. You owe a level of, respect to her and dedication and responsibility and all these things, right? But what I learned was, especially the reason why I decided to share this story and kind of like put myself out there, was because the more I spoke with women in the community, the more I realized that there were a lot of women who were hurting just as I was, who had that little maternal, that pain inside that they just could not get past, and in some way, shape, or form, formed who they became, their identity as a woman, and ultimately then, of course, affected their relationships, whether it was romantic relationships, relationship with friends, or just, relationship with coworkers. It affects a large gamut of what you deal with in life. So for me, it was important to share the story, to express these things that I knew. Had I had a book like this that would say that I could read at the time that I was dealing with it and say, wow, okay, I'm not alone in this, and it's okay for me to feel these things. But certainly a lot of the things that she was keeping from us were difficulties she was having with my brother's lifestyle. He was addicted to drugs. He was addicted to alcohol, and we saw these things unraveling as children, and things happening, not just my brother coming home beat and bruised, but also the after effects of that, the pain that my mother experienced. And then there was the constant moving and the shifts in the relationship with my father, and trying to understand all these things. And of course, as children, you just tag along, because what else do you do? But you see these things that are not spoken, and you just have to take them in, and you get the whole, you're a child, be seen and not heard conversation. So that's what led to this.
What was at least three of the most, without revealing everything out of the book, but what were some of the three things that transpired during that phase, those phases of your life, that you had to undo once you got married or you started to evolve into your own femininity or womanhood?
Yeah. Oh my gosh. But if my husband were here in this room when I answered this question,
should we take a pause and go get him in the grass?
Listen, pride, independence, to the point where you depend, you want to depend and can only depend on anybody but yourself. And then also, oddly enough, the secrecy, because my book is called Enough with the Secrets, Mama. And we saw her likelihood to keep things to herself for the sake of saving face, shame, pride, a lot of number of things. And so then to some extent, as I grew, there were things I was keeping, that had I been more vocal about it, would probably have been a little easier to manage. But because of the pride and the shame and the embarrassment and, all these things that we think, okay, we'll experience them, but no one needs to know about them.
Give me one example.
Absolutely. You say give an example?
Mhm. Yeah, give me one
Yes.
example with you.
With me, so for instance, I had carried on in life pretty much dependent on myself because I did not have that connection with my mother. There were so many things that I tried to do that were also in a way trying to get her attention and love and affection. So I became a perfectionist, which to some people are like, oh, that's awesome, but perfectionism really in so many ways set me back because there was so much I was trying to accomplish and do it properly and perfectly and to make sure that I was successful, that it was keeping me from being able to let loose a little bit and let other people's opinions, guide me, especially if they were going to be of any help. So that kind of way of being, and independent, thinking really affected things in my relationships. And so that didn't make for very healthy relationships. It made for conflict, and also disagreement. And to so many extents, I decided that I would, if it wasn't going to work and I needed to control the situation, I would just completely pull out of it. And I'd say, okay, this is not working for me. And I just remove myself. So that would be the best example.
What was really not working for you in the relationship? And, because you mentioned multiple relationships, and this is a two-part question. What wasn't working for you? And then more importantly, with you recognizing these setbacks or these conditions that you had developed, how was you able to really understand what a functional relationship would have been anyway?
Yeah. So
It
the
was
lack of
basically your terms.
transparency.
You know what I mean? You was basically my terms or no terms.
Yes. Well, lack of transparency for me was like that major trigger because I think in so many ways that is what I've lived with and what I was uncomfortable with all my life in living with my mother. There was a lack of transparency in the things that were happening. And so when there's not any trust within a relationship and you can't get that, you don't have that give and take, it's really hard for you to build a relationship. So when there was no budging in that area, for me, it was like, okay, this is not going to work. So I would do like my mother did all the years in our upbringing, just up and move, and not so much in the technical, state of up and moving, but just removing myself. I'm just going to step back. And maybe you need to go and figure yourself out, or maybe I'm not the person for you. But that is what was my thinking at the time.
Let me go here for a minute. Your book is based on relationship with you and your mom. But let's go back for a minute. I know this might be hard to comprehend right now, but I got to say this. You have a mother and a father. You have a biological father. Your DNA stems from him as well. Have you ever sat down and talked with your mom to say, okay, well, what was he like? Before you start making assumptions that everything that is triggering you is based on the reactions that you're getting from your mom, even though your mom is your caregiver. The only role model male figure is someone that your mom was in love with, who stepped in as a father. Does that make any sense?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, we've definitely had those conversations. My biological father, from what I know, is and my mother was very careful to not to speak bad of him in any way. Very respectful to that. Just kind of letting him have that opportunity at some point in time, which he did. When I was 27, I did have a conversation with my father for the first time. And I think we had maybe a couple more conversations before it became a blame your mother game. And then I had to, remove myself because the conversations weren't productive. So what I learned both from my mother and from those conversations with him was that he was very stubborn, and unwilling to accept accountability, for whatever happened. Even if it was just, here I am at 27, the last time you saw me was maybe 2 years old. And, you're, instead of taking this opportunity to get to know me, you're taking this opportunity to speak badly of the woman who raised me. So what I learned, of course, is that, the stubbornness, I'm sure that I get from my father as well. But my mother was also very stubborn. I saw that in her, and in hindsight, looking at her relationship with my father, the father who raised me, I see how that way of being really affected their relationship ultimately, and how he had to pull away.
I was thinking that same thing, but this is your story. I wanted to make sure that I heard
Yes.
it from your mouth, because I'm sitting here analyzing the same situation that you're telling me. So let's go here. You mentioned, the secrets. It's a parent's job to protect the child. I can understand the secrets, but I'm glad that you wrote a book about it, because let me go here. Looking back, and you have children, right?
Yes, I have one son. He's 25.
Now just flip this script for a minute. Don't you find yourself doing some of the same things that your mom has done to you, based on the fact that you now have a son? I mean, I understand that you don't. I just think you have to have certain things that children should not know about, no matter how you look at it.
True. And I think a lot of it was protection. There are certainly some things that are not for children's ears, or, even understanding. There's no way that kids can understand certain things that are happening at certain times. But when you carry on in your life, past childhood and adolescence and into adulthood, continuing to carry, to save face and carry so much of what's going on behind closed doors, just kind of keeping it under wraps, it does start to affect your ability to build a relationship with anybody, whether it's your mother, your father, your siblings. You feel like you don't really 100% know this person. And in so many ways, I knew who my mother was and is, but I didn't ever have that relationship. For instance, I've never been able to sit and talk to my mother about what's going on with my life. The conversations have always been what's going on in her life, what things are affecting her in the moment, what things are stressing her out. And I'm going to be completely honest. I think in a conversation, when I speak to her, there's not one, how are you doing? How are you feeling today? What are you up to? What are your plans? That kind of thing. And so it was very self-centered and focused on her troubled children. So me being the one that wanted to be seen, I pretty much took on this way of thinking that I was going to be the child that was not going to give her any issues. I was going to be the perfect child. So because if I was this perfect child, then maybe she would love me more and see me more. Fast forward, I, have my own child, and my focus in having my own child is to not repeat a lot of the things that I was hurt and pained about with my mother. So I was again, being this person who was always focused on perfection, was going to be the best mom ever. I was going to raise this little boy to be the best upstanding citizen and young man as best I could. And because at the time I did not have a partner, his father and I weren't together. And so I pretty much from inception raised this kid by myself, with knowing that he was my responsibility. And so I took that on so seriously that, even when I wanted to have children again, when I married, we couldn't conceive, for other reasons. But I took life so seriously that I was going to focus on making sure that I did not repeat a lot of those things. Now, that does not mean that I was the perfect parent, because there were some things internally within me, not that my mother passed down to me, but internally within me, like the perfectionism and the pressure that I put on him as a child to be this kid that I was. Now, that's where the pressure came.
I was just getting ready to ask that question, like, what would you done if his father wasn't in the picture? Because now let's go back, because you already clarified that. Mm-hmm. Did you find yourself now having more understanding for your mom versus questions about it? Because let's get real, you're in that same situation now, so to speak.
Absolutely.
So now this is even more pressure, because had you been fully healed before having this child? Mm-hmm. And then more importantly, what did you find yourself repeating unconsciously that was happening in the secrets with your mom?
I was not fully healed by the time I had my son. I was still trying to figure my life out. I was 20 when I had him. I was a junior in college, and I was just about to actually drop out of college because I felt like my responsibility to my family, having been the only breadwinner now at this time in my life, was more important. And so when I found out that I was with child, I said, oh no, I cannot drop out of school. I have to finish. I have to make sure that I am my best for this little person I'm bringing into this world. As far as things I repeated, was your question?
Yeah.
Yeah. Things I may have repeated as a parent, I would say probably just I didn't get this myself from my mother, but what I saw in her focus with her other children, I became, super focused on him. So I would say that's probably the one thing that later on, especially as he, graduated high school, I struggled with releasing. Would be one thing, with just releasing. But again, not because that is how she treated me, but because that is how I saw that she was with my other siblings.
Wow. Now let's go here before we wrap up.
Yeah.
Now that you look back on these situations with your mom, these secrets, let's ask ourselves the big question: were they really secrets that or were they protection mechanisms put in place? You had a chance to write the book, but at the end of the day, how do you really analyze it? Were there secrets, or were they really protective mechanisms to protect your mom's sanity and to protect her child? Not saying I'm defending either one.
Right.
I'm trying to get your standpoint on it after you could put all the papers and pens down and you went and looked at the final rough draft. What was your conclusion here?
Absolutely. It was certainly a protective mechanism. That's how she felt she needed to carry on in order to survive, in order to just really focus on the issue at hand. That is how she had to carry on. In hindsight, I can certainly see that. Living it as a child is a different experience. When you feel the way you kind of grow up with this self-perceived neglect. And the biggest issue here in my story and what I found a commonality in speaking to a lot of women who felt this kind of pain was that because I was the child that she didn't have to worry about, I didn't get the love and attention. She would always say they need me more. And so what was happening was I was looking at this, I was kind of living this life with us as a family in our home and feeling like an outsider as much as I tried. And then not being able to connect with her and have conversations with her because she thought I had it all figured out. And ultimately, to some extent, I did. But that does not in any way negate the fact that I needed my mother and needed those conversations totally as an adult and now, a mother. I understand how some of the things could have been, self-protection. But there gets to be a point where your children are growing up and they need you. They need to have those conversations and being honest and truthful in order to help them build a better identity for themselves and improve their relationships, that you need to be able to let some of those things go.
I'm pretty sure your mom has read the book, correct?
Partially. I translated it to Spanish, and she has partially read it, has not fully read it, but we've certainly discussed it. Yeah.
When she started to read it, based on where she's at now with how much she has read, what has been her reaction to you?
Well, I will tell you that it's funny and I laugh because her perception of this book is that it is all about her. Whereas the book is really an understanding of our relationships, the difficulties in our relationship. And even though it starts with understanding who she was, and by that beginning, there's so many amazing things that I express about her and what she went through in her early life. I don't think she got past that. But what's amazing about that is that is a reflection of who she is. And ultimately my goal with sharing my story is that there is not going to be a happy ending. Our parents are who they are. They're going to be who they're supposed to be and who they were built to be. And we have to be okay with that. I would have loved, how many times I've been asked that question. And I would say, I would love to have been able to say, my mother read the book. We sat down and had a conversation about it. Yeah. The entire book from front to end. And she asked me questions and, I would love to have had that, be the thing that happens, but that's not who she is. That's not who she is.
She's going to come around one day and read it, and your wish will come true. Let's go back with this one question before we wrap up.
Yes.
You mentioned that a lot of other women have come forward saying this. Now let's go here for a minute. Resonating with your story, is it, how wide culturally is it? Is it more of, are you getting just as much response from the Caucasians, the Latinos, the African Americans, the Mexicans? Like, how widespread is this right now, that women feel the same way you did, that went through the same type of journey?
Oh, I've learned it's not just within our culture, Hispanic culture. I've had Black women who've expressed that they have had the same experience. White women who've expressed they've had the same experience. Just basically in terms of what my reach has been in the community, in speaking engagements, at book events, people who come to the table are of all different kinds. And what I understand about that is that it's not just a story that will carry within my culture, but certainly it's struggles that are faced within other cultures as well. And what's interesting, and I always like to say this, is I was at a Barnes and Noble book signing when my book was launched, and at the in the line, ready to buy the book were several men. And one man in particular, came up to me and really kneeled down in front of the table and said, "Thank you for writing this, because this is my wife. And I want to learn to understand her a little better, because this is the circumstances she faced and the troubles that he was having, in his relationship with his wife." So I would say, even men, a few men have trickled into understanding by reading of this book.
My last question. I know I said this repetitive. My last question. What have you learned for yourself, growth-wise, that beast mindset, after putting everything down? I like the way you said your parents are your parents. Let's get real. If we can make perfect parents, we all would have done that. But what your definition of perfect is not going to be my definition of perfect. So at the end of the day, what have you learned? What growth process have you gotten out of this journey?
Yeah, overall, that the becoming your best self isn't easy. But it's worth it for the sake of your own healing and the healing of generations to come. I think so many times we are really stuck on the way that we were raised and the things that we experienced, and we carry that on to the way that we, then raise our children, sometimes not knowing. And so, as far as beast mindset work, I think that choosing truth and healing and discipline to change your legacy is what this is all about, because ultimately what we want is to leave a legacy of children and grandchildren behind that can carry on in a way that is conducive to building a healthy family and a healthy life. And even though, people like me have not not had it easy in doing the work. I think it's important that we're honest with ourselves and say, hey, my relationships aren't working, or this isn't working for me. Why is that? Where is that coming from? And be accountable for the errors that you make, in your life, and understand where that came from ultimately. So I think, if anything, this is an invitation for people to really be honest with themselves and who they are, and really delve into doing the work.
Wow. How can the viewers reach out to you and get a copy of this amazing book that you've created?
Yeah, so the book Enough with the Secrets, Mama, is available anywhere you buy books. Whatever your favorite online retailer is, you can find it there. I am most active on my inspirational platform, Issa Lifestyle. That's ISSA Lifestyle. And it's a platform that I started as a way to inspire people during difficult time. I started that right after COVID. I was seeing a lot of people struggling just emotionally and spiritually. And so Issa Lifestyle is the place where you'll find me the most. GreenConsultingOfficial.com is where we do work with businesses and nonprofits, and you can connect with me there for speaking engagements and all other great things.
We're definitely going to have you and your husband come back and talk about your crisis situation, on how you help people. We're going to talk about how you and your husband help small businesses on a completely different episode. We'd love to have you come back, both of you guys, and talk about that. But in the meantime, you guys make sure you subscribe, like, share, click that button. Sometimes all it takes is one click to make a difference in somebody's life or change your life. This has been another. And Lynn, thank you so much for coming on the show. Definitely going to have you back. Ladies and gentlemen, like I said, this has been another exciting episode of the Andre the Beast Creighton Show.